Welcome to Cool Explorations. I am your host, Tony Peters. Today we're going to be speaking with Soslan Temanson about escaping communism, and he's going to tell us what it was like, that whole experience of coming to Christ despite being in communist areas, and what his time was like growing up in an orphanage and then having to be moved and then moved again, and how God was with him and worked with him throughout those entire things. And even when he came down with this illness that he's got right now that we will talk about, God has still been working on him, making him stronger spiritually because of these challenges. And a verse that he holds dear is Proverbs 17:22, where it says, "A joyful heart is good medicine, but a crushed spirit dries up the bones." And so we're going to talk to him about that. I hope that you enjoy part 2 of this 3-part conversation as things start heating up in the Cool Explorations studio.
It's sad because you have a certain now a godless, and my whole thing is once you have a godless nation, you have depravity of man shown, and what we are seeing in America especially is the depravity of man. And one thing that I did not notice is that people in America have gotten way too complacent, have gotten way too lazy, and have now gotten to a point where we it's like handouts, like I expect these things, and and like for instance, we are expected to um, go to go to work, and we are expected to do all this, and especially when the COVID lockdowns were evident, it was sad because what should have been open were the churches. That's what should have been open, not strip clubs, not bars, and the sad part is no one really took a big fence of it. And that's where
Yeah.
you show, wow, where did it? Well, besides, I was a huge proponent saying that we need to keep everything open, because in our biblical thing, in our life, when we truly accept Jesus Christ, and this is when I got, and by the way, this is when I got the concept of stating that, the path to heaven is a lot narrower than you think it is. That's where I got the big aha moment, thinking, oh, wait, our path is maybe narrow. Like, you don't want to be on that 8 or 10 lane highway into heaven, because that is straight to the white throne judgment. You want to be on the single lane path that is based off of my podcast, and based off Hebrews 12:9, where the path that God has set for you is individualized. It's meant just for you, and you're going to have hills and valleys. You're going to have ups and downs, but at the same time, you're going to just keep, when you cross that finish line, you are going to run into Jesus's arms, and he's going to say to you, "Well done, my good and faithful servant." But it's going to be a tough road. It's going to be a tough road when, for instance, Greg Locke, he's battling that. When you have churches in California battling that too, a very famous church in California kept their doors open and kept accumulating fines for having the church doors open. It's just really sad. And now we also see how in Wisconsin and also around the United States, we're saying that Christians are nationalists. And that's a huge red flag there as well.
Yeah.
And that's where you have the big, that's where the big changes, and that's where you brought up in the beginning, where the persecution is now, we don't have to dream of it. It is literally
It's
at your door.
starting.
It
Yeah.
is, and it bled through Canada, and now it's starting, and it is at full swing, and it's going to get a lot worse for people, and that's where you have to be firm in your foundation
Yeah.
and in your.
Our church is actually anticipating losing our charitable status. We're trying to financially prepare for that, because we know that's going to hit people when they can't get their charitable receipts for giving or anything like that. Because yeah, we're fully anticipating it within the next couple of years here, just because of the way the government is going. They've been really hammering down on churches, Christian churches in particular, less so your Islamic churches or your um, Jewish tabernacles, or not tabernacles, synagogues.
Synagogue.
Um, but Yeah, they've been really hammering down on us. So we're fully anticipating it. I'm becoming a member of our church actually this coming Sunday, which I'm excited about. I was a member of my old church years ago, but I haven't attended there in a long time. So it's about time I'm transferring membership. And as a church body, we're preparing for this. We're like that this is what's going to happen. We know what's going to happen, and that is the persecution that we're seeing creeping in, and it will creep down into the states more and more, because Canada definitely. Usually, we follow suit of what the states does within a few years, but in that kind of thing, the states I think is a few years behind us.
Well, because when you have an administration that my whole thing is that when you have an administration that does not know God, he's lawlessness, and he just listens to the lawlessness. And when you have Trudeau pointing at Joe Biden, thinking, no, you are going to be doing what I say, and you're going to be doing what I, and for instance, you're going for China and stuff, you're going to be like in China telling Joe Biden, no, you're going to do what I tell you to do, whether you like it or not, because after all, you are the big guy. Well, you're supposedly the big guy. Well, I'm the bigger guy. Now I'm going to give you the 10%, and I'm still going to put Hunter on the board of, especially in Ukraine. Well, and another thing is, I want to bring up a key point. You look at the whole Russian-Ukraine war, and this is where how this is where the big problems are. And for instance, I've done a lot of research because first of all, like it's the Russians and it was my former country, and now like okay, I want to dive into a little bit because there's got to be I want to know what the aftermath is. What are they targeting and why are they targeting?
What's their
Well,
end goal? Yeah.
yes. So here's a quick fact. So far, Russia has hit over 30 biolabs in Ukraine. And those biolabs were inside schools, inside churches, and inside hospitals. And guess where the biolabs, guess what stamp they had? Not made in Ukraine, they had made in America.
Yeah.
And see, and that's the problem. And you wonder why, like the Russia's all bad and stuff, and you wonder why. Well, some parts are, don't get me wrong. But why is our ties and why are we so connected and into the whole Ukraine thing? We elected President Zelensky, our country did per se. Well, we meddled in their elections. And not only that, but the whole and now you look also at the FTX thing, over $23 billion lost, and you have
Yeah.
multiple countries that are affected by it. Like South Korea is the number one country of over 300,000 citizens affected by the whole FTX fiasco. And now that, but you have your multi-billionaires in America, the top, Joe Biden, the DNC, the Democratic National Committee, Tom Brady, which lost 650 million, Giselle, his ex-wife, and the list can go on with the celebrities. And see, and it was a big funneling experience between like, well, we're going to give this huge amount of money to Ukraine, but anyway, it's going to go through FTX, and then just went and embezzled back. And even President Zelensky got affected by it too because and he was funneling. So and here's another thing that that is you're seeing the church split as well because we're stating that like the church isn't saying that we have to stand with Ukraine. We have to do all this. Now, yes, we do, but it doesn't mean that we can send them and we can send other. We don't have to send them resources. Like we don't have to send financial resources because like they're sitting on $2.8 trillion.
Yeah.
2.8 trillion dollars. I mean, the United States is like, I mean, we don't have any. I mean, they're way in the surplus. So why are we? And see, and it's sad because and I give credit to Franklin Graham, who is leading the charge and giving and actually looking out for the people. And you're seeing that the Ukrainian government does not really care about their own citizens because if they did, they wouldn't be going after churches. If they did care, they wouldn't be going after people that actually are taking time to worship God. Before the war happened, that country used to be an awful country to live in because he would go after if he spoke against government, if he spoke out against God, or if you spoke of God and if you had a faith, he went after you and he would put you in work camps. So Ukraine is not a good country as people say it is. And it's just it's a very, and it blows my heart. It blows my mind how people are uneducated and they just listen to the big old propaganda
The
machines.
echo chambers. Yes. Yeah.
Yes.
Yeah. My wife and I have both said many, many times that we'll never know the truth about what Ukraine is actually all about. We'll never know the truth because both sides are shoving their own version of it down your throat. Russia's going to say what they want. The US is going to say what they want. Ukraine is going to say what they want. And it's never going to be the truth. The truth is going to be some combination of all of them. And somewhere in the middle there is you're going to find it. And the news is terrible on both sides. Like
Yeah.
it's really hard to find unbiased news. I do have a couple that I do listen to that are not biased, and they actually call out both sides. And when I did politics, that got me in some trouble because I called out both sides. I never ever took a stance on the left or the right. I'm like, you're both wrong. You're both being children. Let's just
Yes.
meet in the middle and have discussions, which is something nobody wants to do.
And we are seeing that in America. We are seeing
Yeah.
that because we are seeing, for instance, we are seeing like how, I don't know if you heard about this, but a pastor was arrested and parents are being arrested by the FBI. And in America and stuff, the FBI is being sent to school board meetings. They're being sent to Planned Parenthoods. So you can't protest outside of Planned Parenthood because if you do, you get arrested. And not only that, but they arrested their own citizens after a staged insurrection, which the whole thing was, and now they're going after a man. They're going after President Trump and everyone tied around him. You know,
Yeah.
because I mean, and the whole thing that isn't like that's completely flipped backwards is they don't dare go after George W. Bush. They don't go after Mitch McConnell. Um, they don't go after let's see who else. Mike Pence. They're not going after him.
Or
And
yeah. Or
and
even Bill Gates for that matter for some
yeah,
of the different
or
things he's
Fauci
done.
even. Yeah,
Yeah.
they don't go
Yeah.
after Fauci, and it was absolutely an embarrassment. And the whole thing is just really sad, and that's where I look at it. I'm like, God, and it's sad because I did multiple. If you follow my podcast and stuff, I did an address to America after I call I want to be Hitler. After he gave that demonic red symbolism and stuff, he
Yeah.
had a
Yeah.
demonic satanic. I said, you know what, Lord, I understand that our nation as well. We had our days, and now it is time to call upon you to come down and free from us from the chambers of hell,
Yeah.
because it's going to get worse. And if you look at it, at the same time, we're not in Revelations after all, and I've read Revelations. We're not in there, so maybe this could be the big downfall of America.
Yeah, well, and we never know when the Lord is coming, so it's something we have to be prepared for.
I'm
But
ready for it. I don't know about you.
when Revelation and tribulation period hits, we're not going to be here for it, and I don't want to be here for that period because that
No,
period is not going to be a period. It's going to make all of this look like nothing, and I think
and
that
that's scary.
it is. And as
Yeah,
Christians, we really need to wake up because as a nation, we have in the US and in Canada fallen so far away from our Christian roots. The pilgrims, Thanksgiving is coming up here. The pilgrims were founded on Christianity and on a true following of Jesus Christ and the teachings of Jesus Christ. And that's
amen.
how they wanted to found the country. And now we've gone so far away from that, they would be ashamed, so
Yes,
ashamed. And God is only going to put up with so much before he says, okay, you've pushed me far enough. You've pushed me away. You've turned your back on me. Now here is the punishment and
and
the call, the wake up call.
amen. And another thing that I also want to emphasize on is, you have people that come from different countries, the persecuted countries. You have people that come to America for freedom. You have, for instance, immigrants like that come from North Korea, that come from China, that come from the countries that do suppress you. And here's the sad thing is, I understand why the church. I understand that Jesus is holding back because there is. if you look at, I'm going to try to get on the positive side. There's underground churches that are flourishing up in Russia, in Russia, in North Korea, and in China. There's
Yeah.
massive churches that are flourishing underground churches because people want to hear the word of God. So and I understand until everyone has the ability to hear the word of God, then until everyone has the ability to choose yes or no, then God will come down. And
Yeah.
then, but we are given a choice whether to accept His plan set before us or deny Him and be casted out into the lake of fire and face the wrath of God and face His judgment. And it is, and I look at those countries and I'm thinking, man, I mean, imagine the churches in Africa. Imagine the churches in the Middle East and Afghanistan right now. Imagine the churches in the mountains that the Taliban can't find, but they're trying to. How they are on fire and they are dependent upon God for each and every day. And that's where you see the beautifulness of God and how you see Him truly protected. You see Him working in the midst of it.
Yeah.
That's the side of this whole thing.
Yeah, well, and I think that that actually ties into the other verse that you sent me, Psalm 56:3. When I'm afraid, I put my trust in you. They
Yes.
put their trust in God and God alone. They are like, we are going to follow God no matter what the cost. And that's something that we have just not any concept of. And I've talked to people in Europe and in Great Britain, and they've been like, we can't talk about God anymore because if we talk about God, our friends won't want to be friends with us, and they reject us. So we just don't talk about God. I'm like, well, you can't just not talk about God. That's falling into exactly what the devil wants. And when you are afraid, you need to put your trust in God. And that trust involves the Great Commission and sharing the gospel.
And so that verse, that hit me, and I was actually moved to tears when I read it the first time, and that's why it resonated with me because I travel a lot. I travel, and I was flying from Chicago to Seattle, and what happened was I was sitting next to a gal, and it was during the pandemic, and I had "God Bless America" mask, and the sad part to me was actually like, well, do you believe in God? And I'm like, well, what about you and stuff? She's like, well, I'm agnostic. So I found out what agnostic is that it's a person that doesn't believe in God, but it's a person that believes in somebody else higher than God. You know. Well, the sad part was that um, my faith at that time, well, it was not that faith. It was actually a couple months ago, like last year. It folded up like a lawn chair and then fell over in the wind because I pretty much stated that I said, well, I really don't believe in God. I believe that there's a higher power, but it's not God. And that's what literally came out of my mouth. And right there and then, I was convicted and I absolutely felt like garbage the whole entire flight. And the reason why was because I didn't want to have controversial problems. And that's where I see and that's why I've looked at my heart and thinking, okay, you know what? You need to stop appeasing the people. You need to be more towards firm in God because, the moment that for instance, if it's going to come down to this point where, like the job or the vaccines, that came out, or I meant the orange juice, when you had to drink the orange juice or you're going to lose your job. Well, what happened was I ended up losing my job and I didn't drink the orange juice. So I'm like, okay, you know what? If I can do that, then I can also do other things. Then I can really pronounce my faith with God and I don't have to be afraid of the consequences that are going to happen. And sometimes no, we don't have to have people that like us. We're in a world where people are divided. And especially November 8th of this year was a key evident reasoning of thinking, man, we do have a lot of work as Christians. We are divided beyond fraction, and it is very well evident.
And if we're not united as a church, we cannot expect to reach other people because they're like, you're divided, you're not getting along, yet you're telling us you follow a loving God and that we're supposed to love each other and love your neighbor. That's not to say that we don't stand firm in our doctrine because there's doctrine we need to stand firm on. And church has become too wishy-washy on a lot of that doctrine and
Oh yeah.
letting a lot of stuff in that should not be in a church setting at all. I hope that you have enjoyed part two of this three-part conversation with Soslan, where we have been discussing some of the things that really need to change in our society and in culture, and how we as Christians should be reacting to these things that are happening biblically. And we really need to focus on making sure that we have our own foundation solid so that we can defend against what is going on in society and the things that society is telling us as well. We have finished discussing more about his life and things that have been going on in his life. If you would like to reach me for any reason, you can do so at tpeters745@gmail.com.